Well, hello, Harley. Hello, Andre. Uh, well, I have a little bit a different view. I think that whoever is responsible for the adoption of the sanctions against Afghanistan and for the freezing of the Afghan assets in the United States and in Europe after the Taliban takeover in August is also responsible for the following. According to the German UNICEF head, Christian Schneider, 1 million children under the age of 5 are acutely undernourished in Afghanistan. And their condition is such that in Germany, they would have to be treated in an intensive care unit, which means that under the current circumstances, they are likely to die. According to the United Nations, 8.7 million people are in an advanced state of starvation. 24.4 million, or 55% of the population, are in an emergency situation, which means they lack all the basic necessities of life, while 98% do not have enough to eat. More and more families are selling some of their children in the hope that the others will survive, and people are selling their organs. Also, the mass media in the United States and Europe, following a brief hype in August and early September, have reported almost nothing about this worst humanitarian crisis on the globe. The leaders of those NATO countries that withdrew so hastily from Afghanistan in August knew, of course, that 80% of the country's budget came from aid provided by donor countries, and that the combination of the cancellation of these funds, the freezing of Afghan capital, and the sanctions would strangle Afghanistan economy overnight. After 6 months of unfolding tragedy and countless appeals that were in vain, except for a few recent small concessions, one must ask what the intent of this policy is. The argument that the Taliban first have to recognize the rights of women and so on becomes absurd when those women and their children are dead. Is it the intent to sabotage the Taliban's ability to maintain a functioning state to such an extent that the opposition, including ISIS, Al-Qaeda, drug traffickers, warlords, etc., gain the upper hand? The consequence would be a new and bloody civil war, a hell in which the civilian population, between hunger, freezing temperatures, COVID, epidemics such as polio, measles, dengue fever, and diarrhea, will be crushed, and millions of refugees will attempt to seek safety in neighboring countries and in Europe. That would be the continuation of the British Empire's Great Game of Bernard Lewis and Zbigniew Brzezinski, which aims to ensure the geopolitical destabilization of Russia and China and to prevent the economic integration of Eurasia through the Belt and Road Initiative by using the old instruments of terrorism, opium wars, and ethnic conflicts. Should this policy, quote, succeed, it would be just one more element in the great final act of mankind's tragedy, which is now playing out on the stage of world history between the adversaries of the West and Russia and China, and which has now reached a point described by the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists as 100 seconds before midnight on the doomsday clock. There is a counter-concept for saving Afghanistan, which I have named Operation Ibn Sina. Ibn Sina, who lived some 1,000 years ago, was one of the greatest physicians of universal history, whose canon of medicine remained in part a reference until the 18th century. Ibn Sina was born in what is now Uzbekistan. His father came from Balkh in Afghanistan. In times of the corona pandemic, it is extremely important to remember that it was he who recognized, among other things, the immense importance of quarantine in combating epidemics. In addition to being an outstanding Renaissance man, he can become a symbolic figure for saving Afghanistan. Operation Ibn Sina can bring about a change for the better in two ways. First, it can become a synonym for international cooperation in building a modern healthcare system and providing food for the Afghan people. If all the neighboring countries, as well as the United States and European nations, which fought in Afghanistan for 20 years as part of NATO, and therefore have a moral obligation that cries out to heaven, help the people out of this undeserved acute distress and cooperate in a crash aid program, the worst can still be averted. In addition to the humanitarian aspect, Operation Ibn Sina would also have a military strategic dimension. If Russia, China, the US, and India, the four nations with the greatest military and economic importance or size of population, could cooperate, this would become a confidence-building measure for resolving the major strategic conflicts. Afghanistan, unlike the strategic importance of Ukraine or Taiwan, is not one of the core interests of Russia and China. It is many thousands of miles away from the United States, while India, on the other hand, has a core interest in the stability of its geographic surroundings. The cooperation among these four powers, together with the mobilization of other formats that exist, such as the Troika Plus, the SCO, and the OIC, with the aim of saving Afghanistan, can be a step towards the new paradigm in international relations. Without it will not be possible to come to a lasting survival of humanity. There is no place on this earth, and that includes the strategically explosive potential of destabilization operations around Ukraine and Taiwan, where the moral fitness to survive of the human species is more tested than in Afghanistan. It is not our security that we need to defend in the Hindu Kush, as the then German Defense Minister Peter Struck had claimed on the 11th of March 2004 to motivate German participation in the Afghan war, but it is our humanity. Military strategists are invited to take into account what might be an unfamiliar domain in strategic thinking, the moral condition of the population, both their own population and their adversaries. When the French Revolution failed due to the Jacobin terror, Friedrich Schiller found that a great moment had found a small race, that also the objective opportunity existed, the subjective moral capacity was lacking. He then wrote the aesthetic letters with the conviction that from now on, any improvement in the political sphere would only be possible through the ennoblement of the character of the individual. He considered that the education of the capacity of the Empfindungsvermögen, of empathy, is the most pressing need of the times, because it awakens the improvement in understanding. From this perspective, overcoming the depraved indifference in parts of the population, which makes them equally insensitive to the suffering of other peoples and to the effects of their geopolitically motivated demonization of the supposed enemy, is a strategic factor of the highest order. Operation Ibn Sina should therefore become the flag under which all forces unite who want to save the Afghan people out of agape, who want to bring about a new paradigm in strategic relations as the means of final overcoming the threat of war, and who want to defend the humanity of our species. Thank you.